fist to jump off. My first leg blast like you popping that pump off.
That was an assassination. Let me explain what happened. Scott had a deal for Boogie Down Productions because Scott was so far ahead of everybody business-wise. He knew things that me, Chris, Keith couldn't fathom.
That's the last we ever seen of Scott. Scott didn't even know he was shot. According to RoboCop, they was driving, and all of a sudden Scott was like,
Remember Scott LaRock, the pioneer DJ who helped birth gangsta rap, was killed under circumstances so suspicious that 3 decades later, people still question what really happened that August night in the Bronx.
Scott said no. So Scott had to be removed. So they set up this thing in the Bronx. Now, understand this. Scott went there and actually squashed the beef.
The official story claimed he died trying to break up a fight over a girl.
Shooter was in place, Vlad. This is simple detective work.
Okay, and you feel that B-Boy Records is behind the whole thing?
Yeah. B-Boy Records was dirty.
But what happened earlier that same day would reveal a conspiracy that went straight to the top of the music industry. So, let's get into it. Scott Monroe Sterling grew up watching the Bronx burn around him. His parents split when he was 4 years old, leaving his mother, Carolyn Morant, to raise him and his brother alone. They moved through Queens and Morrisania before landing in the Morris Heights projects, where Scott learned early that survival required more than just street smarts. He excelled at everything he touched. Our Savior Lutheran High School made him a varsity basketball star. His grades opened doors to Castleton State College in Vermont, where he continued dominating on the court while earning a business degree. His college roommate Lee Smith remembered coming home to bass pounding through their dorm room door, finding Scott hunched over turntables while textbooks gathered dust on the floor. Vermont gave Scott distance from New York's chaos, but it couldn't keep him away from hip-hop. He started DJing Friday nights at a local bar called Dugan's, bringing the sounds of the Bronx to students who'd never heard anything like it.
It's almost like 4 o'clock in the morning now.
It's worth it.
Is it?
Yeah.
How are you gonna get home?
Go home by taxi.
The music consumed him. Basketball became secondary. By the time he graduated in 1984 with his business administration degree, Scott knew exactly where his future lay. He returned to New York with a plan. Through his mother's connections, Scott landed a job as a social worker at the Franklin Armory Men's Shelter on 166th Street in the Bronx. The position paid enough to survive while he built his music career at night, spinning records at the Broadway Repertoire Theater and other hip-hop hotspots around the city.
I came up here with the idea of the battle. I was really against it, but that's what they wanted to do, so I tried to give them what they wanted. I don't like the battle. There's no need for battle. My records speak for me.
The shelter job put him face-to-face with the Bronx's forgotten population, men destroyed by addiction and poverty, and a system that had given up on them. Most shelter residents blended into the background, interchangeable victims of circumstance. But in 1986, Scott noticed someone different. A graffiti artist named Lawrence Parker, known on the streets as KRS-One, had been living in the shelter but wasn't like the others drowning in bottles and needles. Parker had intelligence and charisma that cut through the shelter's desperation. He tagged walls all over the Bronx with KRS-One in letters that demanded attention. Scott heard Parker freestyling one night and recognized something special. The kid had raw talent that just needed direction and structure. They started working together, Scott providing the beats while Parker delivered lyrics about the Bronx streets they both knew intimately. They brought in Derek Jones, a young DJ who went by D-Nice, and formed what they initially called Scott LaRock and the Celebrity Three.
Well, basically the crew consists of 2 people, myself and my partner, KRS-One. And we got started about, say, 2.5 years ago. We had made a record with another group called Celebrity 3. It was called Scott LaRock and Celebrity 3.
The name didn't stick, They rebranded as Boogie Down Productions, paying tribute to the Bronx's reputation as the Boogie Down. Scott handled all the business while crafting beats that pushed hip-hop into darker, grittier territory than anyone had explored before. His production borrowed from James Brown, but also pulled from AC/DC, Billy Joel, and the Beatles, creating something entirely new.
Started B-Boy Records, draw a label, do all the music, do everything. I'm out here to get paid.
Are you? You making some money now?
Yeah. I'm on my way to becoming a mega star.
B-Boy Records signed Boogie Down Productions in 1987. The label operated out of the Lower East Side, run by Jack Allen and Bill Kamara, two men who saw dollar signs in the emerging hip-hop scene without understanding or respecting the culture. They gave BDP minimal budget and even less support, but Scott made it work through sheer determination and creativity. Criminal Minded dropped in March 1987 and immediately shifted hip-hop's entire trajectory.
Criminal minded, this the jump off. My first leg blast like you popping that pump off.
The album cover showed Scott and KRS-One posing with guns, ammunition, and stone-cold expressions that announced this wasn't party music anymore. Inside, tracks like South Bronx and The Bridge Is Over declared war on MC Shan and the Juice Crew, igniting the bridge wars that would define East Coast hip-hop for years. The production stood out from everything else on the radio. Scott sampled with precision, building tracks that felt aggressive and intellectual simultaneously. He understood music theory from his college years, but applied it to street narratives about violence, survival, and Bronx pride.
We signed the contract. We went to McDonald's on 68 in Broadway, so just like that. Right? It was all of us plus RoboCop was with us. RoboCop was with us. And Big Darryl was with us.
KRS-One delivered those narratives with authority that made every word feel like lived experience rather than performance. Criminal Minded started selling hundreds of thousands of copies, but B-Boy Records slow-walked royalty payments. Scott discovered the label was keeping the bulk of the money while feeding BDP scraps. He launched a lawsuit that dragged through courts while the group's profile kept rising. Radio stations that initially refused to play their music started putting South Bronx into rotation. Clubs from Harlem to Brooklyn packed whenever BDP performed. Scott's business knowledge separated him from every other producer in hip-hop. Most artists signed contracts without reading them, trusting labels to handle the money fairly. Scott read every line, understood publishing rights, knew how deals got structured to exploit artists. He realized B-Boy Records had them locked into garbage terms that would keep them broke even as their album went gold. Through Ice-T, Scott connected with Benny Medina, who headed Warner Brothers' Black Music division. Medina recognized what BDP was building and agreed to sign them immediately. The Warner deal would let them keep their publishing, meaning they'd actually profit from their success instead of enriching executives. Scott explained to KRS-One and the others how publishing generated long-term wealth while advances disappeared quickly. But Jive Records entered the picture with a competing offer. Jive put more cash up front than Warner Brothers, which tempted everyone except Scott.
I know it's hard to, be able to do everything you want to when you're limited by, the other members of the group and the confines of the song and whatnot.
He tried explaining that Jive's contract gave them all the publishing through their Zomba Music subsidiary, making the bigger advance meaningless in the long run. Warner's deal let them retain full ownership of their publishing, which would generate far more money over time. The debate split the group. KRS-One was living in the men's shelter, desperate for immediate cash. The bigger Jive advance meant he could get his own place, buy clothes, stop struggling day to day. Scott kept arguing for the Warner deal, insisting they'd make far more money by keeping their publishing. He understood long-term strategy while everyone else fixated on short-term survival. B-Boy Records preferred the Jive deal because Jive offered them a buyout for releasing BDP from their contract. Warner Brothers told B-Boy Records to tear up their garbage contract and get lost. The label stood to pocket money from Jive that they'd never see from Warner. They pushed hard for BDP to sign with Jive, using their financial leverage to pressure the group. August 27, 1987, started as the best day of Scott LaRock's life. After months of negotiation, the Warner Brothers deal was finally coming together. Scott had convinced everyone that keeping their publishing rights mattered more than Jive's bigger advance. Warner agreed to let BDP control their entire catalog, setting them up for generational wealth instead of quick money. Just Ice, another Bronx rapper who'd become close with BDP, joined them that morning to finalize his own deal. The group celebrated at a McDonald's on 68th and Broadway in Manhattan, far from the Bronx blocks where they'd built their reputation. Scott, KRS-One, D-Nice, Just Ice, and their bodyguard RoboCop sat eating and talking about the future. Everything seemed perfect.
And we was eating, and Chris got a phone call from Derek and was like, Ray, yo, I need some help.
D-Nice's voice came through the phone, frantic. He was up in the Bronx at the High Bridge projects, caught in a situation with some local guys over a girl. One of the girl's ex-boyfriends had confronted D-Nice with his crew, and things were escalating. D-Nice was only 16 years old, scared, asking for help from the only people he trusted. The group at McDonald's debated what to do. They were in Manhattan, safe, celebrating. The Bronx was miles away, and street beefs over girls happened constantly. Just Ice and the others wanted to stay put, let D-Nice handle it himself, or just leave the area. But RoboCop, the bodyguard, insisted they had to go get him. Scott agreed immediately. D-Nice was part of their crew, practically family. They couldn't abandon him.
Daryl, RoboCop, the original RoboCop, was like, we gonna go up there and I'm gonna go get Derek. Scott was like, I'm gonna go with you. That's the last we ever seen of Scott.
Scott and RoboCop left together in the white and red Jeep CJ7. They drove from Manhattan up to the High Bridge projects, where D-Nice waited outside the building. By the time they arrived, the situation had calmed down. D-Nice talked with the guys who'd confronted him earlier. Everyone exchanged a few words, typical Bronx posturing, but nothing violent. The beef got squashed right there on the street. Everything was resolved. D-Nice got in the Jeep with Scott and RoboCop, ready to head back downtown. They'd diffused the situation without any drama, exactly what they'd come to do. Scott felt good about helping his young friend, about being the kind of person who showed up when called. Then RoboCop did something that made no sense. He jumped out of the Jeep and ran over to one of the guys standing nearby, someone who hadn't even been part of the original conflict. RoboCop grabbed the kid and slammed him hard onto the pavement, a completely unprovoked attack. The kid ran into the building, and RoboCop ran back to the Jeep.
I said no. So Scott had to be removed. So they set up this thing in the Bronx. Now, understand this. Scott went there and actually squashed the beef.
They pulled away from the curb, thinking it was over, but gunshots erupted from above. Someone on the roof of the building, 17 to 20 stories up, was firing down at them. A .22 caliber bullet, one of the weakest rounds made, somehow found its target through all that distance and wind. The bullet went through the Jeep's roof and hit Scott in the back of his head.
That's the last we ever seen of Scott. Scott didn't even know he was shot. According to RoboCop, they was driving, and all of a sudden Scott was like...
Scott touched his neck, confused about why he felt dizzy. He asked why he was feeling strange, not understanding what had happened. Then his head hit the dashboard and he stopped moving. RoboCop realized Scott had been shot and sped toward Lincoln Hospital, but it was already too late. Scott Monroe Sterling, 25 years old, died on the operating table from a bullet to the brain. The official story claimed Scott LaRock died in a random street altercation. Wrong place and wrong time. Police arrested two men, Corey Bain and Kendall Newland. but with no witnesses willing to testify, both walked free. The case went unsolved, filed away as another Bronx tragedy. But people close to Scott never believed the official narrative.
Yeah.
From what I understand, D Nice was messing with some girl in the Bronx, and he got caught messing with her, and they kind of kidnapped him in a way. And he called Scott LaRock.
Said G from Ultramagnetic MCs worked closely with Scott on Criminal Minded. 30 years later, he sat down for an interview and laid out what he believed really happened. According to Said G, the shooting wasn't random at all. It was a carefully planned assassination, orchestrated by B-Boy Records to eliminate Scott before he could take BDP to Warner Brothers. The timeline supported the theory. Scott squashed the beef between D-Nice and the local guys immediately upon arrival. Everyone was calm when they got back in the Jeep. Then, RoboCop suddenly attacked someone completely uninvolved, creating chaos where none existed. The attack gave the shooter time to get in position, and the shooter had to already be in place because there was no way to run inside the building, climb 17 flights of stairs to the roof, and shoot within the 30 seconds between RoboCop's attack and the gunfire.
Now, there was this guy, his name was RoboCop. He was a former security guard at Latin Quarters, bouncer. He was driving the Jeep. Now, I guess the president of the label had given him orders to start some beef. Because for no reason, RoboCop got out of the Jeep, ran over and smacked the kid. The kid.
Said G believed RoboCop worked for B-Boy Records. His job was to create the conflict that would justify the shooting. The shooter waited on the roof before they even arrived, positioned and ready. 10 shots got fired total, and 2 hit Scott with precision accuracy from an impossible distance. No stray bullets, no missed shots hitting random people. Professional execution disguised as street violence. The .22 caliber weapon choice seemed deliberate. A .22 makes less noise than larger calibers, easier to fire from a rooftop without drawing immediate attention. The bullets are smaller and lighter, normally easy to blow off course by wind or distance. But that day, there was no wind. The shooter had perfect conditions and took his shot when the target presented itself. B-Boy Records stood to lose everything if BDP left for Warner Brothers. They'd lose their biggest act and get nothing in return, since Warner told them their contract wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. But if Scott died, KRS-One and the others would be too shattered to think clearly about business. They'd be vulnerable, easy to manipulate into signing with Jive, who'd give B-Boy Records their buyout money.
Shooter was in place, Vlad. This is simple detective work.
Okay, and you feel that B-Boy Records is behind the whole thing?
Yeah. B-Boy Records was dirty.
The label's reputation supported the theory. Jack Allen and Bill Kamara ran bootleg liquor operations and illegal P-Griffey businesses on the side. They weren't legitimate businessmen who happened to have a record label. They were criminals using the label to launder money and exploit artists. Killing someone who threatened their profits wouldn't have been unprecedented for men in their world. Scott's business knowledge made him dangerous to the label. He understood publishing, contract law, how deals got structured. He could read the fine print and explain to other artists how they were getting robbed. If he took BDP to a major label and succeeded, other B-Boy artists would follow. The label's entire operation would collapse without artists to exploit. Scott LaRock's death sent shockwaves through hip-hop that rippled for years.
Tragic that what happened to him, you know.
Right, that was right when you guys were working. You'd been working with them just that day, right? And then
that's the day we just signed the contract that day. That same day he got killed, the same day we signed the contract together to my album.
He became the first major hip-hop artist murdered, setting a tragic precedent that would claim Tupac, Biggie, Jam Master Jay, and countless others. The violence that had always existed in hip-hop's margins moved to center stage, impossible to ignore anymore. KRS-One channeled his grief into activism. The next BDP album, By All Means Necessary, featured him on the cover holding a gun while looking out a window, mimicking Malcolm X's famous photograph. But the music shifted away from the gangster narratives of Criminal Minded. Now, KRS-One rapped about stopping violence, uplifting black communities, education over destruction.
I walk with my head up. When I hear whack rhymes, I get fed up. Rappers like a...
The Stop the Violence movement emerged directly from Scott's death. KRS-One organized a supergroup of hip-hop's biggest names to record self-destruction, a track warning young people about the consequences of violence. Heavy D, Kool Moe Dee, MC Lyte, Public Enemy's Chuck D, and dozens of others contributed verses. The song became a movement, playing in schools and community centers across America.
America's problem is self-destruction. Yeah, for self-destruction.
In 1988, violence erupted again at the Dope Jam Tour when someone got killed at Nassau Coliseum. The incident proved Scott's death wasn't an isolated tragedy, but the beginning of a pattern. KRS-One intensified his activism, transforming from the aggressive rapper of Criminal Minded into the teacher, preaching consciousness and peace to audiences who came expecting battle rhymes. D-Nice moved out of the Bronx after Scott's death, unable to stay in the place where his mentor died trying to help him. The guilt haunted him for decades. In interviews years later, he'd break down crying while describing that day, the senselessness of losing someone over nothing. His music career continued but never reached the heights it might have with Scott's guidance.
I was kind of confused, whether I want to be a part of the streets or did I want to be a part of music. I guess something going on with my life. I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I was so young.
Just Ice, who'd been with Scott hours before the shooting, watched his friend die for a deal that never happened. The Warner Brothers contract got canceled after Scott's death. Jive Records swooped in and signed BDP, just like Said G predicted. The label that Scott fought so hard to avoid ended up controlling the group's catalog anyway. Everything Scott tried to prevent came true the moment he died. B-Boy Records folded shortly after Scott's murder. The label released a few more records but never recovered from losing their biggest act. Jack Allen and Bill Kamara faded from the music industry, their brief moment of relevance ending when the artist who could have made them legitimate died in their Bronx projects. The city of New York renamed part of Jerome Avenue in the Bronx to DJ Scott La Rock Boulevard in his honor. At the ceremony, politicians and music industry executives gave speeches about Scott's contributions to hip-hop. They invited various artists to speak about his influence, his vision, his impact on the culture. But they didn't invite Said G, one of Scott's closest friends and collaborators. Said G watched people who barely knew Scott claim him as their friend, telling stories for the cameras while the people who actually worked with him stood in the crowd. The disrespect burned, the same industry that possibly orchestrated Scott's death now using his name for publicity. Said G finally grabbed a microphone himself and spoke without permission, ensuring someone who actually knew Scott got to say something real. Scott La Rock Jr., Scott's son, attended the ceremony. He'd grown up without his father, knowing him only through stories and music.
Do nothing he wanted to do to get where he felt like he wanted to go. So all that you got to do to get there, that these niggas is doing, because they doing it.
The Boulevard naming gave him a place to connect with the father he'd lost before he could form memories. But it couldn't fill the void of growing up without guidance from a man everyone described as brilliant, kind, visionary. The conspiracy theories never disappeared. 3 decades later, people still debate what really happened that August night. The official unsolved status kept speculation alive, fed by the suspicious timing, RoboCop's inexplicable actions, the impossible accuracy of the shooter. Hip-hop heads argued online and in barbershops about whether B-Boy Records really orchestrated a hit. Criminal Minded remained influential long after Scott's death. The source ranked it among the 100 best rap albums ever made. Rolling Stone put it on their 500 greatest albums list. Complex called South Bronx one of the greatest diss tracks in hip-hop history. The album Scott produced in a basement with minimal budget and maximum creativity continued inspiring new generations of producers and rappers. His production style influenced everyone from Dr. Dre to DJ Premier. The way Scott blended genres, sampled unexpected sources, created dark atmospheric beats, became the template for East Coast hip-hop production. Producers studied Criminal Minded like a textbook, trying to decode how he'd built such impactful tracks with limited equipment and resources. Scott's vision for branding hip-hop acts proved decades ahead of its time. The Criminal Minded cover with guns and ammunition created an image that defined gangster rap aesthetics for years. The way he positioned BDP as street-educated philosophers rather than party entertainers opened space for socially conscious hip-hop to coexist with harder-edged content. The investigation into Scott LaRock's murder closed with no answers. Corey Bain and Kendall Newland got arrested, charged, then acquitted when witnesses refused to testify. The Bronx District Attorney's Office moved on to other cases, leaving Scott's death unsolved and his family without justice. Police filed it away as another gang-related shooting, meaningless violence in a borough full of it. But the people who were there that day know the truth doesn't match the official story. 6 people rode in that Jeep, and only Scott got hit. 10 shots fired with military precision. No wild spraying, no panicked shooting. 2 bullets found their target from 17 stories up using the weakest caliber handgun made. The odds of that being random are astronomical. The timing of Scott's death solved multiple problems for B-Boy Records. They avoided the Warner Brothers situation that would have left them with nothing. They positioned themselves to profit from the Jive deal through their buyout clause. They eliminated the one person in BDP smart enough to see through industry manipulation and protect the group from contracts. Scott's funeral became another industry spectacle. People who'd never supported him showed up to be seen at the event, networking while his family grieved. The same executives who'd underpaid him for Criminal Minded gave speeches about his talent. The same label that possibly ordered his death sent flowers and condolences. Hip-hop watched its first major funeral and learned how death could be commodified. Scott LaRock's death certificate lists the cause as homicide. The case file remains open, technically active but realistically abandoned. No detective is investigating who really ordered the hit. No prosecutor is building a case against the people who benefited most from his death. The truth sits in closed files and sealed testimony, protected by time and the industry's code of silence. DJ Scott LaRock Boulevard runs through the Bronx, where he lived and died. Cars drive past the street sign every day, most people never knowing who he was or what he sacrificed. The boulevard stands as a monument to a man who tried to change hip-hop from the inside, who understood the business could lift people out of poverty or trap them in exploitation. He died fighting for the former, killed by people invested in the latter. Anyway, that's it for the video, folks. Bye.